Great. Okay, there we go. All right, guys. Now we should be good. So welcome everyone. We want to talk to you guys about medical school interviews, since I'm sure a lot of people here are in the application cycle. And we decided to create these 2 webinars through JOMA. The first one is going to be talking about the structure, which is tonight. And then we're hoping to have a part 2 at some point in November. And that'll be more of a Q&A session, and it's going to be with current first-year medical students who just applied last cycle, so they can really give you guys details on how the online interview process works. My name is Jackie. I graduated from SUNY Downstate, and I'm a first-year pediatrics resident at Westchester. And the other people on the panel.
I could go. I'm Brenda. I'm a medical student at Donald and Barbara Zucker School of Medicine in Hofstra/Northwell. I just finished my 2nd year of medical school.
Hi, I'm Eliana. I graduated from Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School, and I am a pediatrics resident with Jackie at Westchester Medical Center.
Yay. All right, guys, so here we go. Brenda, you want to talk to? Oh, sorry. Actually, I will mention this. Okay, so the different interview types. Sorry, guys. I just want to make sure. Give me 1 second. I want to make sure we're using the right. Yeah, we are. Okay, we had edited this PowerPoint. So there are different interview types. There's the traditional interview style, which is when you have like an interviewer, sometimes 2 interviewers, and you sit with them for around like 15 to 20 minutes. They ask you questions about yourself, about your application. There's also an MMI, which is like multiple station interview style, where you'll often be presented with different tasks or different scenarios, and you have basically many short 5 minutes interviews with different people in the medical school admissions committee. So it could be anyone from a current med student to like a faculty member. There are closed and open interviews. So closed interviews are where they don't look at your application before, they kind of interview you blindly, and open is where they'll review your AMCAS application before starting the interview. And this is a newer, the VITA is a newer interview style that was used last year, where they had these pre-recorded interview questions, and people spoke into a camera and recorded themselves with whatever prompt they were given.
Sorry, forgot to unmute. So there's different types of MMI stations. One of them is a role play station. So there'll be like an actor there or somebody that's pretending to be an actor, and then there'll be an observer that will watch this interaction, and it's usually a communication aspect. So like, I don't know, for example, if like the situation might be like you're a manager in an ice cream store and one of the customers got in an argument with your worker, and you're pulled to the front to have a discussion with the customer, and then the actor would be the customer. A scenario station is that they'll give you like some type of situation and ask you how you would handle it. And I think under scenario station, I would also include like just like a topic they might ask you about, like they might ask you a quote and ask you like what this quote means to you or how you would explain it. So like the scenario stations, there's a lot of in it, and I think that like there's other ways to categorize it also. A task station is like they'll ask you to do something. It might be with a different applicant, it might be on your own, and there's an observer watching you do the task. When it's with someone else, like communication is a very important thing they're looking at, and so is teamwork. I'm not sure how they do task stations over Zoom, but hopefully the students for the interview tips 2 could speak about that. And then traditional interview station is just like any traditional interview. They'll ask you like questions like, why do you want to be a doctor or something, but they'll have those stations in the MMI. So you get those traditional interview questions. Some schools do that.
All right, so
is this my slide or not sure?
I guess you want to just take it?
I don't know though, it might be yours actually. I'm confused.
It's okay. Okay, so common interview questions. Things like, why do you want to be a doctor? Every single interviewer is going to ask you that at any institution, whether it's an MD program, a DO program, it's a 4-year program, a 3-year program, American, or like outside the US, you guys are prompted for that. I would suggest trying to come up with a slightly original answer, even though, you know, a lot of us go into medicine for different reasons. We had role models, we had positive experiences, we had our own health experiences. However you can personalize it, tailor it to you, even if it's just as simple as like, you know, I was interested in this because when I was a kid, I saw this happen to a family member and that really touched me. And then I decided to explore it, like have a little bit of a story behind it. Why do you want to go to our medical school? That's extremely important. There are many, many medical schools. The 3 of us went to med school in the tri-state area. So, you know, we are kind of more saturated with schools probably than other parts of the US. So you want to research the school so you can answer this question, whether it's because of the location, the diversity, the patient population, the type of procedures they do. It's a level 1 trauma center and I really want to do trauma. Or I really like that they have a separate children's hospital. I'm interested in peds, or whatever is going to appeal to you. Or like, you know, I have a connection at this institution. I did research with this person and I really like that it's a research focused school. Whatever you can put in, just have something to say. Even if it's a safety school or a backup school. What are some of your strengths and weaknesses? That's also a very common question. And I think a lot of people are tempted to give very PC answers like, oh, well, my only weakness is that I'm such a perfectionist that, you know, like those are fine. And I definitely don't think you should put yourself down in a weakness. I definitely think you should emphasize something that can be turned into a strength, but you want to be honest. And I think just being consistent with your answers is important. Talking about a challenge you endured, how you handled it, that's also a very common question, or a mistake you made, or anything along those lines, because I think the interviewer wants to see how you handle an uncomfortable question and that you show some level of introspection, self-reflection, growth. And then having questions for me, do you have questions for me about our school? They'll often ask this at the end, and I would again prepare to have specific questions, whether you want to ask about the curriculum or the student body or what people do for fun. It's good to have questions for the med students and also for the faculty. Like try to think of a couple of questions. They don't have to be earth-shattering, but you know, just say like, oh, you know, I'm really interested in this field of medicine. Like what type of opportunities exist for students interested in this field? Or you know, I saw online that the curriculum, or a friend of mine who's at this school told me that you know, you do 4 months of gross anatomy. A lot of schools do gross anatomy throughout their entire first year of med school. How do you think that benefits students? You know, just be prepared. Just show that you're there, you're present, just like you would for a job interview. Eliana, do you want to take this one?
Sorry, I'm muted. I will take this one. These are just types of questions that I think actually, if you guys want to take a screenshot of these questions, just so as you're preparing, you can look through them and come up with answers yourselves, that could be really important. So these are just examples of commonly asked medical school interview questions. How has, like, and these things will get you to talk more will often get you to talk more either about what's on your application or specifically something that isn't on your application. So for example, for research experience, you can, if it's an open interview, they have already read what you've written there, and it can be helpful to not just reiterate what you've written there, but maybe add something new to what you've written about your research and how you think it's going to help prepare you for medical school and beyond. And the same with all of the other things that you may have already listed on your application, like jobs, volunteer opportunities, and extracurriculars. And make sure to pinpoint why you think those specific experiences will help you in medicine, just communication skills, leadership, working on a team, things like that. And then this last one can actually be really important to come up with an answer beforehand, not to sound too rehearsed, but if you do have any challenges, like let's say in one of the major sciences you didn't get, let's say you had a C in one of the major sciences, but the next semester, like Orgo 1, you got a C. In Orgo 2, you're like, oh, I really worked hard. I learned how to study specifically for Orgo, and I ended up with a B+. And it showed that I that I had a struggle in the beginning, but I learned from it and I was able to improve. Or just any other challenges. If maybe there was a certain part of your MCAT score that wasn't so amazing, but just something, don't harp on it so that that's all they're thinking about at the end of the interview, but just to have like an explanation for something that might come up as a red flag in your application can be really important.
Somebody, just to mention one thing, somebody told me, it's like, don't bring it up unless they bring it up, but if they do bring it up, like what Eliana's saying, have a reason, but don't be embarrassed. Like, I'm sure even some of your interviewers got a C in Orgo. Like, it happens all the time. It's more common than you think. But, you know, just handle it maturely and like move forward.
So the personality question section is something that they can't get off of paper, and is something that you, well, except for maybe the hobbies one, because maybe you've listed your hobbies in your application. But one of the questions that I really like is like, how would your friends describe you? It's sort of a more clever way of saying like, list 3 adjectives that would describe yourself, but just have some adjectives prepared that you think describe you and would also show a strength in a medical career. For example, I was always known to be very organized and like had the colorful notes and everything. And so that's something that I think helps me in medicine, just like being especially in intern year. There's so many things that we have to do all the time, and keeping on top of everything is really helpful. And I still use my colorful pens every day. But these are really important because there can be times an interview is only 15 minutes long and this person has an 8 or 9 or 10 or 11 or 12 page document to read about you. And that's all they know other than this 15 minutes that they're spending with you face to face or screen to screen. And so it's important for you to be able to show off more about who you are and not just what you've done. And so I don't need to go through each of these questions, but actually during one of my residency interviews, I was asked this last question about a mistake I've made, and how I would have prevented someone in my same situation from making that same mistake. And I thought, I had never heard that kind of question before, and I thought it was really interesting. It made me think on the spot, and I hopefully came up with a good answer. But I think that we all make mistakes, and as a pre-med, medical, resident, all stages of life, we tend to have very type A personalities where we don't like to make mistakes or admit that we've made mistakes. But I think it's important to recognize when those things do happen and then figure out how we can learn from them and how to prevent them from happening again.
I would also say, I think it's particularly important to, with the hobbies and interests, the reason why they're asking you is not just to know that you're a well-rounded person, but it's really because to be successful in medicine, you have to have a good form of stress relief. And they want to know that you're going to be able to handle the rigor of, you know, the academic and the schooling. Like if you're at an interview, that means that your application was strong enough and you made it past the other whatever percentage of applicants. But if you have a difficult time coping with stress and being able to balance things, then it's going to be difficult to get through med school. So they're doing that just as much to like learn about you, but really just to make sure that you'll fit in with the standards of and the rigor of the schooling.
I think this one is mine too. Then this is also to, these types of questions are to get you to think outside of the I just need to get into med school, I just need to get into med school frame of mind, but also to show that you're thinking beyond that and what you might be interested in within medicine, what, and they can use this angle, I would say, to come at the why medicine question too, asking, is there anyone who's influenced your decision to pursue a medical career? I think for a lot of people, especially in the JOMA community, they haven't had family members or maybe role models telling them to go into medicine, and they might have actually had some people in their lives saying, how dare you go into medicine? How are you going to have a family and raise your children? And I think you can answer that question too. And it can even, and don't make a point of like harping on the negatives of those people, but just saying that I have had sort of influences in my life that have tried to push me away from a career in medicine, but I'm so passionate about it and I still think it's really important to me. And, you know, take it from there and sort of spin it in a different way. And what else? Maybe you do have a role model. I mean, my dad is a surgeon. I've spoken about him in many interviews about how he, number one, turned me away from surgery, but also just how I see that he really has dedicated his life, number one, to his family, but number two, to helping other people and making them feel better, even though that means sometimes going under the knife. And just watching him come home every day, maybe a little frustrated, but also just overall satisfied with his career choice has always been very influential for me. So things like that, just to get your interviewers to know you a little bit more.
Brenda, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So they're going to ask you like ethics questions and like public health questions, possibly. One of the things that I found very helpful was to read up on the 4 pillars of medical ethics. You could find an article easily online. I did take medical ethics in undergrad, so that was just helpful in my aspect. But you could also like there's a lot of podcasts that discuss like healthcare issues and ethical issues, and I think that listening to those podcasts just around interview season will help you with these questions. I'm not going to read through them because you could read through them later, and it's just these are just practice ones that will help you. Like you should sit down, try to answer them to the best of your, but like sit down, answer them, and they'll help you have thoughts of like what to answer, even if it's not this exact question. But during your interview, it'll help you in the long run because you'll have like some thoughts towards these topics.
Okay, so for diversity questions, I think especially today, like in this day and age, this is a very important topic in medicine. So diversity comes in different shapes and sizes. So I think sometimes Orthodox Jews may or may not think of themselves in a diverse category, but regardless of what checkbox you fill out based off of your background, you can still talk about diversity and what it means to serve a diverse population. And again, we all went to med school in the tri-state area. So tri-state tends to be a very mixed sort of population, but I think regardless of where you attend med school, you could still pick on something that's diverse. So being female is a level of diversity, and it might be something that comes up on your application. It might not, but if it's something that's meaningful to you, you could definitely choose to make that part of the focus of your answer. I also saw this online about the minority. If you're not a minority, how might you best meet the needs of a multicultural patient population? So even if you're not a minority, but if you have family members that are immigrants, you can still talk about how that allows you to relate to your patients better. Being economically disadvantaged, or, you know, just even thinking about how a doctor could work to bridge the gap for patients that are at disadvantage. So they want to know that you're thinking about these things, because it's not just about the practice of medicine, but it's also about the people skills and healthcare policy and how doctors influence society. Somebody told me this, and I thought it was a very practical way to think about it. When you are entering a profession, you are almost entering their club and their societal like standards, and like you have to play with the rules of the club. So doctors they have tenements of medical ethics, like these pillars of equity and helping people and what that really means. So you have to start thinking in those terms. And that's another thing that an interviewer wants to see. They want to know that you can start thinking about, okay, I have 2 beds. Who's going to get the bed? Like, you know, I have X amount of resources, or my patient is on Medicaid and the pharmacy down the street doesn't take Medicaid. So what am I going to do for them? Or, you know, just to start thinking about the practical everyday decisions you make as a doctor when you're working in an area that has limited resources, or your patients have limited resources.
And with Jackie bringing up Medicaid, I told Jackie and Brenda before in my Rutgers interview, actually, I got asked if I knew the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. So just a little hint. Google is a good friend there.
Do you want to say this, anyone? Why medicine?
I think it's your slide, Jackie.
Okay. Either way. Okay. So definitely why medicine, but with medicine, you know, most people that enter healthcare want to help people. So why medicine? The third question that was asked to me, and it's not just asked to me by interviewers, it's asked me all the time, like, oh, why'd you become a doctor and not like, you know, a therapist or a psychologist? You know, there's a lot of, or nurse, there's so many helping professions. So if you want to talk about the diagnostic skills, if you want to talk about the understanding of whatever you want to talk about within the profession of doctoring that differs, you should. And you'll see it more when you are a student. I'm going to shine by all of you. You know, you'll see what it means on an everyday basis, being in a hospital setting. But you also don't want to put down any other field in healthcare, because really it is about teamwork. And I think they want you to be cognizant of the fact that you are a member of a team, but this is your unique role within that team. I think this is another good question. What would you do if you're not accepted to medical school this year? Maybe they might ask you at all. I actually don't know, to be honest, what the correct answer is. If the right answer is to say I have a backup, because that shows that you're a practical person, or if that shows that you're not passionate enough, if you say, oh, I have a backup. But I think that whenever you have an opportunity, even if you're not sure like what to say, just say like, this is my greatest passion, and this is something that I've wanted to do I've invested a lot of time and energy into this. Like, just keep emphasizing that this is really what you want to do, and you're going into it with like full faith in yourself and in your abilities. Yeah, and then you know, if you have any personal experiences, that's another thing that I think gets a little tricky. Maybe different pre-med advisors at different colleges will have a different say on how much you should share about, you know, whether you can share something that's super personal or not. I think it makes you more humanistic when you talk about something that you yourself or a family member went through. But I kind of would treat a med school interview or any sort of interview kind of like a first date, is what people say. Like, you know, you're not going to tell a guy you just met that you were diagnosed with diabetes at age of 2 and like how you spent your entire childhood going to the endocrine, I don't know, whatever you feel like you would feel comfortable sharing to somebody that you're getting to know and you want to have a longer term relationship with, i.e. your future med school, go ahead and share. But I don't think you have to feel compelled or obliged to talk about very personal information on an interview. And I think people also respect a level of professionalism where you talk about things with passion, but without like negativity or sadness. Positivity is good, you know, not that we should force ourselves to be different than we are, but that sticks with people when any experiences happen to you in your life and you can just be positive about it. I think that stands out. Okay.
What I will add to that also is I specifically actually for residency wrote about a personal experience I had had with healthcare, and I was warned time and time again, if you write about it in your application, you have to be ready to speak about it with whoever is interviewing you. So just be mindful of that. If you do, I mean, it's a great thing to write about your experience in healthcare for your personal statement on your application, but it has to be something that you're comfortable talking about and comfortable with. There could be 10 or 15 or 20 people on an admissions committee reading your personal statement. So just be cautious. And like Jackie said, always try and spin it in a positive light if you can, and say what you've learned from it and how you've grown from it, and not like a woe is me type story if you try including those things.
Also, just to add to that is that you should be prepared to like kind of be able to like respectfully tell someone that you're not going to answer a certain question, because they're not allowed to ask you certain questions like about family planning. There's like specific questions they're not allowed to ask you about, and if you do get asked those questions, you want to have a respectful way of saying, oh, that's not something I'm going to answer.
Yeah, and that could also, I don't know if, I'm sure people have mixed perceptions about whether interviewers are trying to test and trick you or whether they're not. I think on the whole, they're not. I think there are some special people that might try to, and you don't know who, like what an interviewer's intentions are. Maybe an interviewer is pimping you just like they were pimped 45 years ago when they were a med school applicant. So ultimately, but you have to be true to yourself. And I think it is appropriate to say like, you know, oh, you know, I think that's a question for, I don't know, that's a question for a different time, or just casually change the subject. Something that somebody told me was appropriate if people asked about like family details is just to say like, oh, in my experience, a lot of people have made it through if you have a child, for example, have made it through med school with a child. So I'm not concerned, or something just very like quick and easy and just move forward. If they're asking this question specifically to like trip you up, not because they care about the answer, but because they want to see if you're following the rules, and you know that they shouldn't be asking you the question, then I don't know, then just like change the subject very subtly, I would say. Okay, so preparation for interview. So reading through your application before you begin, preparing the night before, just making sure that everything is familiar in your application, because you guys probably submitted your AMPCAS applications throughout the summer, and maybe you'll get your first interview in November, December. And even though it's like, oh, it's only 3 or 4 months ago, you're going to forget specific things that are written there. Or if you did research 2 years ago in your sophomore year of college, you might not remember the specifics about, or even especially when you're nervous, you might not even remember like, you know, your first name, whatever it is. Like, hopefully you'll remember that, but you know what I'm saying? Like you might forget pertinent details. So it's better to review it. Don't sound rehearsed, but be prepared and know your application backwards and forwards, because they could ask you about any small detail. Like somebody quoted a line for my personal statement. It's possible he had just looked at it right before I walked into the room during an interview. He said he liked it. And I like had to think in the back of my mind, like, oh, okay, fine. But you'd be surprised by like what sticks with somebody about your application. Researching the school, we mentioned that before, everything from their curriculum, extracurriculars. If you know somebody that is at that school currently, feel free to reach out to them. I'm sure most people would be more than happy to help you. Within the JOMA network, we could also try to connect you. Practice interviewing questions, or just at least familiarize yourself with the common questions that we went through tonight that you might be asked. Knowing about the pillars of medical ethics or some sort of like current events topic, and then, sleeping and all the typical things. Even though it's online interviews, you still want to feel well rested and prepared.
And this is specifically to whoever is interviewing this year. Hopefully it's only for this year and we can go back to in-person interviews after this year. But I wonder if it's possible if you're like applying across the country, if they'll offer a Zoom interview for people. I don't know, we'll see. So Jackie and I had to go through this last year with residency interviews, so we're pros now. But one of the things is, I'll show you this as an example. If I turn off my video, it's not on this one, interesting. But usually when I turn off my video, instead of just having my name there, I actually have a picture of me that I use for my application, so that they're just seeing your face more. A lot of the times during Zoom interview days, they'll offer a break, but you're still on the Zoom session. So just keep your face there. But it should be a good picture of you. I would suggest using the one that you use for your AMCAS interview if you can, application if you can. And make sure all of your names here so far that I've seen have been just fine. Sometimes certain schools will ask you to put your preferred pronouns next to your name as well, just so everybody is sort of on the same page with respect to that. Sometimes they'll also have you add the word applicant next to your name so that it's easy for them to tell in like a big Zoom group if you're an applicant or a med student or an interviewer or someone on the admissions committee. Something that's also really important is your background. If in an in-person interview, you are going into their controlled environment, and on a Zoom interview, you are welcoming them into your home or into a room in school or wherever it is, you have a nice, quiet, non-distractible place to do the interview. So I got a lot of advice about what to put in the background, and to not just have something plain and white and boring, but to not have something overly distracting. So don't have like a bookshelf. Oh, Jackie, you dropped off for a second. And now you're back.
Went down. That is one of the points in our PowerPoint presentation, is specifically to have good internet access, guys.
Yeah.
Hold on a second, I'll reshare the PowerPoint. Give me a minute.
So what was I saying? Backgrounds, right? Yeah, so I was saying Sfarim sometimes can make a good background because they tend to come in sets that look uniform and pretty if they're far behind you. And sometimes if you happen to get a from interviewer, they more for the men than the women, but sometimes they'll bring it up. But even if you just have like for me, for example, I did not interview in this room. I would not have just like a corner of a painting showing, because that could be sort of distracting if they're like, what else is there? But if I were to maybe move this back, this is a big one, but have the whole thing in there, maybe just one of them wouldn't be too distracting behind me. I personally used to, I don't have so much time to do this now, but I used to paint just for fun. And so I put up like this big canvas that I personally had painted, and sometimes it became a conversation piece during the interview. So there can be many things. A lot of people have plants in their backgrounds, and I was always jealous of those. But the other really, really important thing is to have good lighting. Try not to have a window behind you if you can. Purchasing a ring light if you need can actually be really helpful. They have ones for like pretty cheap, like $20-$25 on Amazon. You can get it tomorrow if you have Prime. And the ring light like really helps keep the light steady, and it's also on you, so it makes you look nice too. And if you do happen to have a window behind you, the interview day can be sort of long and the lighting can change throughout the day, but a ring light can help that light source stay kind of steady. And also sometimes you'll look too dark, or like me, you can look a little red or whatever, and the lighting can help with that. Also, one big thing is try as much as you can to look into the camera. It helps them think that you're making eye contact. Try not to get too distracted by looking at yourself. You don't want to like be adjusting your hair all the time as they're talking to you during your interview, or there's actually a way on Zoom where you can hide the little picture of yourself, which I didn't know about, but would have probably been useful for me. And then just make sure, if you're living in the city or a busy neighborhood and you know that there are cars that go by or people mow their lawn at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, like make sure your windows are closed. You can acknowledge if someone does happen to be mowing the lawn right near you. You can say to your interviewer, I'm sorry, my neighbor is mowing their lawn. Sorry for that distraction. But yeah, like Jackie said, make sure you have a good Wi-Fi connection. Keep your computer charged while you are on it. You don't want your computer dying in the middle of your interview. If you're near an outlet, great. If not, get an extension cord, I guess. Also important, if you have an Apple computer and an Apple phone that connect to each other, and you can get your iMessages and your WhatsApps and your phone calls that come up as a little notification in the corner of your screen, make sure to disable those and to disable the sounds that are associated with them, so you're not like constantly looking up into the corner and getting distracted by your messages. It is acceptable to wear earphones or headphones, especially if you don't trust the microphone on your computer. That's totally fine. I don't think anybody would really have a problem with it. I've even seen people with like the big headsets with the like microphone that comes here, and if that's what works for them to help with the sounds, then that's fine. And on a similar note, be gracious with your interviewers. A lot of them are not going to be of our generation or even the generation above us, and they're not going to necessarily be the best with computers. And sometimes, like I did, you might be interviewing, speaking to a black screen because they can't figure out how to turn on your camera, and just say, oh, don't worry about it, it's okay, we can still chat, it's fine. Just give them a second to try and figure it out, and don't get flustered by the fact that they're having technical issues. If you really feel like the technical issues took away from your interview, you can for sure email the school, and a lot of the times they'll set up another interview for you, just to give you a fair chance. And just like on the same lines, don't freak out if things like that happen. If your internet happens to go out, everyone in this day and age is so used to all of these technical issues happening. And again, if you really think that it was harmful to you in any way, I'm sure you can email the schools and they'll set up another, not whole interview day, but just for you to meet with someone again, to put your best foot forward again. So yeah, be nice to them and don't freak out if bad things happen to you. Everyone is being really understanding these days. And then the post-interview, this goes for Zoom interviews, in-person interviews, any interview you do, you always say thank you as the interview is ending. And then it's really important to get a thank you letter out to definitely the person who interviewed you. You can reach out to the director of admissions or send a letter to the admissions committee in general, just saying thank you. I always like to write down a point or two that came up during our conversations to personalize the letter a little bit, just so not saying like, thank you so much for taking part of your time to meet with me. It was such a great conversation. I'm really looking forward to maybe seeing you one day and working with you one day if this is like one of the places you want to go. But just something to personalize it so they remember you specifically and it's not like everybody else that they've been speaking to. And it's really important to get those out, if not like the day of, within the next day or 2 days. The timing is really important because it shows that you care and that it's not just like something that you're like, oh, hey, I should maybe write a letter to thank them. The next point of writing a letter of commitment or a letter of interest, this can go a long way. I would suggest only sending it to one school that you are really committed to or interested in. I don't know if Brenda or Jackie agree with me, if they maybe say you should send it to a few, but I think if you're really passionate about one school, then that should come through in your letter. And if you're sending it to multiple places, it may not come off as legitimate because it isn't. If you're saying to 3 places that I'm going to come to you if I get in, but if you get into all 3 places, which one's really your top choice? And then there is a big amount of time between when your application went in, when you interview, and when you finally have to make a decision of where you're going to go to medical school, and when you get the decision from them if you've gotten in. And if you're still in school, you may have grades that are still coming in. If you're taking a gap year and you're doing some research, you may have an abstract that gets accepted or even submitted somewhere, or a paper that would be amazing that gets published or submitted or anything, or even just drafted, or even results from research or any other experiences that you have. Just sending a quick letter. You could send, depending on how much time there is, you could send 1 or 2 to the schools that you are that you have interviewed at and are still waiting to hear back from. Just to show that you're still interested, to strengthen your application. It never hurts to say, hey, I took a neuroscience class in my senior year of college and ended up getting an A. They're like, oh, look at that. That's an advanced science course that they did well in. Even if it's just 2 or 3 sentences, can go a long way.
Just a note on a letter of interest or letter of commitment. A letter of commitment says that you're committing to the school. So you really should only send that to one school, and only if you are sure you want to go there. A letter of interest, I wouldn't say send it everywhere, but that's missing the commitment aspect of it. It's like, I'm really interested in your school, but I'm not committing to going there if I get in. This also comes like very helpful if you're put on a wait list. You want the school to know that you're still interested in going there, and then it might help you get off the wait list. In addition, like some schools regarding updates only let you give a certain amount of updates throughout the application cycle. Some don't take updates at all, but some of them will let you do like 1 update. So just be very timely with the update you decide to give, like regarding like research or anything like that. One of my schools, like I was taking like classes when I was applying. So I had a professor who really wanted to write me a letter for medical school, but I had already submitted my application because it was like December time at that time. But one of the schools let me add a recommendation letter to my application. So that was really good, and it helped me get in there, I think, to some extent.
I would also add, I don't know why this is a popular slide for us, but I don't know what it's like now with med school interviews, and I would definitely confirm with people that either applied last cycle or with your pre-med committees. But I know for residency, some institutions specifically did not want post-interview communication. I don't know if that was their policy always, or maybe they thought in light of the fact that there was online interviews and online applications and people were interviewing maybe at more places than usual. So if a school specifically says that they don't allow post-interview communication, honor that. That's not a trick, like that is their policy. And there is also restrictions, at least I would say from the residency angle I could speak of, but I would not be surprised if from the med school angle as well, in terms of how much they can reveal in a post-interview email. So just be mindful of that. And then in terms of showing interest, if you're waitlisted at school or if you haven't yet received an interview, there was one school that offered me an interview, but I think it wasn't a place where I could pick my interview date. I think they pre-assigned it. Some places will pre-assign interview dates. Some places will give you like a selection, and I think they pre-assigned me for like 2 or 3 months from then. So I don't know if, I mean, it worked in my favor, I guess, because I got accepted to the school, but I called them and I said, hi, like I'm supposed to be interviewing in February, but it's December. And I live in close by to your medical school. Like if there's an opening, if a last minute cancellation, would you be able to fit me in earlier? So maybe this is less likely to happen now with Zoom interviews because it's all virtual and people aren't traveling, but there are still a chance that some people will decide once they get into their top choice to drop an interview. So I think just like showing them that you really want that earlier interview because you are so interested in interviewing at this school. And with med school, it does make a difference to some extent, right? That you want to try to interview earlier if you can, or because it's a rolling admissions process. So I think it's appropriate to say, you know, I have flexibility in my schedule. I'm on a gap year and I don't usually work between 9 and 12. So if there's any opportunity or anybody drops a spot, please keep me on your list. And they will. I mean, you might have to remind them, but hopefully that'll give you an opportunity to interview earlier.
So these are the books I read before my interviews. The last one I only read like a couple of chapters, I kind of skimmed it. But the first one, the multiple mini interview, it's really great. It really goes through like what like each station like is like. It gives sample stations. It like tells you like you know, like the structure of how to answer and like general, obviously not like so scripted, but and then it, you know, gives you practices and ideal answers. It's really a great book, especially if you have MMI interviews. I say read it to cover to cover. So that one's really great. The blue book, the medical school interview one, that's also really good for the traditional interview. I also read it cover to cover, was great. And then I read part of the Premed Playbook medical school interview book. So if you have extra time, I would say read that. Also, there's also podcasts that Dr. Ryan Gray has on medical school interview that was helpful also, and you could find it online for free.
If you don't want to read a book, but you want like other things, there are also YouTube videos that might be helpful. But I would add practicing with family members or with friends, like setting up a time, although it requires them to agree, but literally setting up a time where they send you like a Zoom invite and you formalize things. And even if you want to get dressed, however, whatever works for you, might be helpful. I think just being prepared, so at least you knock out the nerves of like never having had any sort of Zoom interview. I think it's worthwhile. I'm just posting in the chat. This is for anyone that wants a ring light. That's the one I use. It's like $20 on Amazon. Does anyone have any other questions? I know there's only a few people left, but you can also unmute yourself. I'll stop the recording.